It's good evening, Ben Waterworth. Thanks for joining us here at Yellow Shelf.
It's an absolute pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today.
Oh, Ben, you have a pretty cool podcast, Off the Podium. This is an Olympic podcast. I reached out to you because the notice came through about 100 days to the Winter Olympics next year, and I thought I'm going to see if I can talk to Ben or to your co-hosts. So thank you for saying yes, and thanks for coming on.
It's a thrill, and it's always exciting to talk about what we do, talk about the Olympics, and just talk in general because I like to talk, Joe. I mean, that's just you're a podcaster too. You only do a podcast if you like to talk, right? So that's why we're here.
Well, and look, it is fair to say, Ben, that I'm a bit of an Olympic tragic in my household.
Good.
I have kids now who, when Olympic times, whether it's winter or summer, everything just goes into like lounge lockdown, watching whatever sports that we wouldn't normally see. So that was one of the main reasons I wanted to get you on. So you could share about your podcast. Ben, what can you tell us about your podcast? What do we need to know?
Well, I love hearing that, Joe, that there are other people out there that are like me, that love the Olympics. And it's sort of, I mean, clearly I do a podcast on it, so I've always been obsessed with it. And I think it was always that thing that when I was particularly younger growing up, the 2 weeks would end every 4 years, and I would feel so sad. It's like, oh, I've got to wait another 4 years, or realistically, you wait every 2 years because obviously you've got winter and summer. But essentially, I'd done a podcast with a couple of guys. We were doing a Survivor podcast back in the day when people would still ask what a podcast was. Now everyone's got one, of course. But we sort of found out we had other shared interests, and one of them happened to be the Olympics, and it was in the lead up to Rio in 2016. And we were like, hey, do you want to talk about the Olympics for the next couple of weeks? So we threw together Off the Podium. I literally think a week before the opening ceremony. We didn't know what we were going to do. We ended up doing a daily show. I grew up loving Roy and HG too much, so I try to be, like the dream back in Sydney. And essentially, we loved every single second of it. Got a bit silly with it, and then sort of over the years, we then turned it into interviews. We got Olympians on the show. Covered the Pyeongchang 2018, then Tokyo, then Beijing, and then obviously Paris came around, and it grew from there. And I think the beauty of it, going back to my point about this sadness every 2 weeks ends, is that a lot of people ask us, how do you do an Olympics podcast? Or every 4 years or every 2 years? And the beauty of what we do is that, yes, we peak every 2 weeks, every 4 years, every 2 years.
Yeah.
But in between every Olympics, there's stories to be told. These athletes are working their butts off to get to these Olympics. For every Michael Phelps, you've got an athlete who is, competing in a sport that, as you said, you don't even know about. So we wanted to tell their stories. We wanted to have some fun with it. I mean, the Olympics is well and truly over 120 years old, the modern Olympics. So we do things like ranking posters and mascots. We love the mascots. We go over opening ceremonies. There's just so much to cover, and it's sort
Yeah.
of for a geek of the Olympics, which is a very niche thing to be a
Yeah.
geek of. It's so much fun, and I think we've found a market where there are fans like us, like you and I, Joe. We love the Olympics, and a lot of these people want to be able to hear about it between the Olympics, and also, again, the athletes. As I said, it's all about the athletes and hearing their incredible stories. To peak for 2 weeks every four
Yeah.
years, like it's an insane thing.
Yeah. And Ben, look, I guess you sort of touched on you've got a couple of co-hosts as well, Colin and Jarrod, and you
Yep.
obviously have guests come in as well. You've got nearly 450 episodes in this podcast. Like you guys have been doing this a while. Like you know your
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it's approaching 10 years next year. It's insane. It's
Wow.
incredible that it's gone by so quickly. And I think one thing that we do is we drop episodes once a week. And, I know a lot of podcasts will say have like a season or a series, they'll do so like 20 episodes, have a break, come back. We don't do that. We're 52 weeks a year, an episode every single week. During an Olympics, we're daily. In the lead up to an Olympics, we're dropping maybe 3 interviews a week. It's something that we're very passionate about to be able to do because, again, back to my point about the stories, is endless stories to tell, and sort of things like that. So it's a lot of content that we do put out, but again, it's sort of, I think there's just an endless fountain there of stuff that we can tap into, and that's what we love doing, and being able to put this show out there for people who I think seem to enjoy it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And people who are curious. Ben, I'm going to share. I went through some old episodes with my kids over the weekend, and we stumbled across an episode pre-Olympics with Rachel Ray. Who
Uh-huh.
would have known, that interview and then her journey beyond the Olympics? I mean, you've spoken to Donovan Bailey, you have episodes, that are candid. You give candid perspectives, you talk about analysis, but you also deep dive into, serious topics around the Olympics. One of my fun topics that I do want to sort of put out there that somebody go and have a listen to this episode is Olympic pin collecting.
Yes.
Because Ben, do you know what? I've never been to an Olympics, but if I went, I would be one of those people getting and collecting pins. So it resonated so much with me.
That was a long time coming, that episode. It's sort of, we have all these ideas and everything. And I've, as an Olympic geek, it was always something that fascinated me because you would always see these news stories and articles in the lead up to the Olympics about the unofficial sport of the Olympics, Olympic pin trading. And I remember growing up, my mum and I used to sort of get some every now and then. Like I've still got somewhere like I think like 1,000 days to go to Sydney 2000 that mum brought back for me from a trip to Sydney back where I grew up in Tasmania and just things like that. And so my first Olympics I went to was Paris, and I, got involved in this insane world of pin trading. And I mean, side tangent, I worked for the Australian Olympic team during that, so I'm in Australian team uniform. So that's a
Yeah,
whole other episode in itself.
yeah.
The logistics about all that pins. So it was always a plan then to kind of talk about that. And Yorick, who we got on, I met him on the ground in Paris, and just such a nice, friendly guy. And that episode, goes for say an hour or so. But I
Yeah.
mean, I could sit there and talk to him for another two or three. It's just it's so fascinating to learn about it. And yeah, I think it's sort of one of these added elements to the Olympic fandom that you've got this pin trading because as you heard in that
Yeah.
episode, it's something that no one ever can have a complete collection of Olympic pins. It's
Yeah.
impossible. It's not like trading cards or something like
Yeah.
that where you can get a full set. This is the endless collection. So yeah, fascinating topic, and I'm really glad you enjoyed that one.
Yeah, no, it was great. You're an award-winning podcast. The New York Times put you in like the top basket of Olympic podcasts. How cool is that?
It's begs belief to me that that is even a thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
like it was one of these things that obviously in the lead up to an Olympics, a lot more Olympic media gets a bit more coverage,
Yeah.
and for the most part, because a lot of major news networks or major networks in general will put out an Olympics podcast in the lead up every
True.
4 years. It's just what they do.
Yeah.
Whereas we're one of the few that obviously are doing it every single week. So
Yeah.
when we were on that list back before Tokyo, it's sort of yeah, like you take a little bit of a moment to go like, okay, this isn't just, your general mum and pop operation. This is the New York freaking Times.
Yeah.
So it's an honor to kind of be in that. And yeah, we've won a couple of awards as well through the
Yeah.
Sports Podcast Awards. And I mean, look, Joe, you know it as well. You don't do it for
No,
accolades. It's that
no.
cliche thing. I mean, let's be honest, we all do. We all want to be rich and famous and Joe Rogan, but we're not going to be
Yeah.
that way. So a nice little mention is
Yes.
okay. But yeah, I mean, when we started this nearly 10 years ago, as I said, like a week or two before an Olympics, they're like, hey, you want to talk about the Olympics for a couple of weeks? Sure. We didn't sit there and go, one day we're going to be in the New York Times.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a nice little honor for sure.
And Ben, finally, what I wanted to specifically mention too is you talk a lot about Paralympics too, which is
Mhm.
just as, well, it's almost even more special than the Olympics, as
100%.
a viewer.
Yeah, it's something that we want to do more of, and we're sometimes a little bit I don't ashamed that maybe the right words, but like obviously we do daily ones during the Olympics, and then we
Yeah.
don't put that coverage. So as much as we do, we want to do more. And yeah, you're 100% right. Like for the most part, Paralympians are just they're the most incredible athletes on the planet. They go through so much in life, and then to just wake up and go, well, no, I still want to compete at the highest level, and we are slowly seeing every couple of years when we as a winter or summer Paralympics that they're getting more and more coverage. They're sort of getting almost on par with the Olympians in terms of the coverage and
Yeah.
everything that they're seeing. So it's important to hear their stories. And arguably, our longest and best episodes are often Paralympians, because they've
Yeah.
just got so much to tell. So
Yes.
yeah, it's important for us to do that. As an Olympics podcast, the Paralympics is so connected to the Olympics, And yeah, we hope that we can continue that and do more, because there's definitely
Yeah.
a lot more that we can do with what we've already done so far with the Paralympics.
Well, Ben, I mean, I feel like I could talk to you about more episodes that I've listened to and even watched on your YouTube channel. I'm not going to, because I want to finally wrap this up by saying, how do we connect with you? I'm hoping everyone around the globe who's watching this or listening to this gets curious. How do we connect with you and the podcast?
Read the New York Times, clearly that's what you're saying before. Off the podiumpod.com, it's a website that we've now got, which we'll be slowly building on. That's got links to where people can subscribe, or simply search for Off the Podium podcast on social platforms, wherever you get your podcast from, and that's how you can find us. And hopefully we can get a few people join on the show, and yeah, we hope that they enjoy what we put out there.
Look, Ben, thanks for joining us. Somehow I want to find another way to get you back. I know you're super talented in the podcasting world, but I'd still love to get you back at another point and talk about Off the Podium, because I thoroughly enjoy it. My family enjoys it, and I hope others tune in. Thank you so much, Ben.
It's an absolute pleasure. I would be delighted to come back. Any excuse to talk about the Olympics, Joe. You find one, and I'll be here. Don't you worry about it.
Cheers, Ben.